Hello, my name's Mary, and I'm coming to you from the children's room of the Portland Public Library in Portland, Maine. And since it's summer, and since we're in Maine, it seemed like a really good idea to learn about something that Maine is very famous for. So, today I have a story about Andre, the famous harbor seal. This book was written by Fran Hodgkins and illustrated by Yeti Frankel. It was published by Down East Books in 2003. Harry Goodrich was a man who loved animals, any animal, and every animal, whether it walked or flew or swam. But Harry especially loved one animal, a seal called Andre. Andre was a seal who loved people. He loved grown-ups, and he loved children who played on the beach. But he especially loved one person, a man called Harry Goodrich. This is their story, and it's all true. One spring day, Harry borrowed a friend's boat and went searching the harbor of Rockport, Maine. He knew these waters well, and he was the town's harbor master. But on this day, Harry wasn't working. He was looking for a seal pup to keep as a pet. At that time, it wasn't against the law to catch wild seals and other marine animals. Today, nobody is allowed to even touch one unless he or she has a special permit. But in 1961, there was no law against what Harry planned to do. He had raised 2 other seal pups, but they had not lived to become adults. This time, Harry was determined that things would be different. Soon, he and his friends spied a pup, bobbing in the waves, with only its big round eyes and the top of its head in sight. The men drew near, and the little seal looked up. Then he swam right over to the boat, as if it were an island ferry he'd been waiting for. Harry took the seal pup home to meet his family, his wife, his children, and their many pets. The Goodrich children shared their father's interest in animals. At times, the house had been home to dogs, cats, rabbits, chickens, a pet robin, and of course, the 2 harbor seals, just like this one. The family named him Andre. At first, Andre spent his days in the yard and his nights in a bathtub in the basement. Twice a day, Harry took him to Rockport Harbor for a swim. Once Andre learned to eat fish, his routine changed. He spent the whole day, every day, in the ocean. Sometimes he would disappear overnight, or even for a few days. During these times, Harry worried. Still, he told himself that if the little seal didn't come back, that was okay. He expected Andre to return to the wild someday. But almost every evening, Andre met Harry at the town float for a fish dinner and a ride home. Harry's little seal soon became a familiar sight around the harbor. He would swim up to fishermen in their rowboats and let them rub his belly with an oar. He would nap wherever he wanted, in an empty dinghy, on a pile of rope, or on a lobster trap. Harry knew that harbor seals are smart. So he decided to teach Andre a few tricks. The growing seal pup soon learned that if he rolled over, shook hands, or clapped his flippers, he would get a fish. At first, Andre would do the tricks just for the food. Before long, though, he was doing the tricks just for fun. People came to watch Harry and Andre at feeding time. The young seal loved their applause and laughter. Soon, dinner time always meant a show. But Maine's summers are short. Winter soon came, and Rockport Harbor became covered with ice. The only clear spot was Andre's entrance hole, where he met Harry for fish. One morning, Harry woke up to a powerful winter storm. He went to the harbor. The ice had broken up. Large chunks ground against each other in the waves. Andre's hole was gone. There was no way to know whether the young seal was all right. All Harry could do was wait. The weeks crawled by. In February, he got a letter that included an article clipped from a newspaper in Marblehead, Massachusetts, a coastal town about 180 miles to the south. The article told about a seal named Josephine that had delighted local people with tricks. As he read, Harry became more and more certain that Josephine was really Andre. So he called a relative who lived near Marblehead and asked him to take a look. But by the time the relative got there, Josephine had left. Weeks passed. Then Harry got a phone call. Andre was in Rockland, just a few miles away, and he needed help. Harry rushed to his friend's aid. It looked as if Andre had fought with another seal. He was cut and bruised, and one flipper was badly chewed. Many of his wounds were infected. To find out what to do for Andre, Harry called some experts. They told him that the seal would eventually die from his injuries, yet Harry wasn't going to give up. He called the veterinarian who took care of the rest of the Goodrich animals. Dr. Mack gave Andre some strong antibiotics. The medicine worked, and the seal recovered. The next summer, Harry and Andre made up some new tricks. All of them grew out of things Harry had seen the seal do as part of his natural behavior. For example, when Andre stretched, he would sometimes cover his eyes with a flipper. He quickly learned to do that when Harry asked, "Aren't you ashamed of yourself, Andre?" Sometimes when Harry had a particular trick in mind, the seal had to figure out what he was being asked to do. So he would try several different tricks, and when he did the right one, Harry's praise and a fish for a reward let Andre know he was correct. And once he learned a trick, he never forgot it. The harbor seal's fame spread beyond Rockport, beyond Maine, even beyond New England. Newspapers and magazines from all over the country told the story of Andre and Harry. Visitors came to Rockport, especially to see the harbor master and his animal friend. When summer ended, Harry again had to figure out what to do with Andre. He couldn't leave him in his summer pen because the ice that always formed in the harbor would crush it. So Harry moved Andre into a friend's boathouse. Miserable, the seal spent his time gazing out the window at the sea. Harry visited him regularly, but Andre remained glum. One day a big storm blew in, so Harry brought the seal home and put him in the basement. In the morning, Andre was gone. Harry discovered a pile of snow on the floor. The seal had pushed out a window and slid over the snow to the water. Harry called the newspapers to alert people that Andre was loose. Soon he got a phone call from a town 50 miles away. He drove there and brought Andre home again. Late the following fall, Harry decided to let Andre take his chances in the wild. After all, the seal wasn't a baby anymore, and others of his kind managed just fine in the ocean over the winter. The experiment succeeded, and Harry and Andre developed a yearly routine. The seal spent the winter at sea, then in the spring he returned to Rockport in his pen. Even though Andre was full-grown, Harry worried about him during their months of separation. The seal still faced possible harm in the stormy Atlantic. Maybe what Andre needed was a winter home where he would be happy. Harry found him one, about 200 miles to the south at the New England Aquarium in Boston. Several other harbor seals lived there, so Andre would have their company, be well fed, and most of all, be safe from the dangers of the winter ocean. The aquarium was happy to have such a famous guest. That fall, aquarium workers picked up Andre in Rockport and took him to Boston by truck. When word spread that this special seal was at the aquarium, crowds of people came to see him, just as they did in Maine. When spring came, the aquarium called to ask Harry when they should bring Andre back to Rockport. "Don't," Harry said. "Let him swim home." But Boston Harbor was full of large ships like freighters and oil tankers. Everyone worried that Andre would be injured if he were let go at Long Wharf. Instead, the aquarium decided to truck Andre to Marblehead and release him there. Harry met Andre and the aquarium people in Marblehead on the day of the release. They loaded the seal onto a boat and chugged out into Marblehead Harbor. Once they reached open water, Harry said, "Go home, Andre." The seal leaped off the boat and vanished into the water. Would he find his way back to Maine? Did he want to? After a winter in captivity, would he decide to spend the summer at sea instead of in his cage in Rockport Harbor? As Harry drove home, he wondered. A few days later, the phone rang. A fisherman had found Andre, curled up in his dinghy, sound asleep. Soon another call came, and then another, all from people who had seen the seal. Each sighting was closer to home. Then there was one last call from Rockport Harbor. Andre was home. For 8 of the next 10 years, Harry's harbor seals spent summers in Maine and winters either in Boston or at the Mystic Aquarium in Connecticut. His fame continued to spread. The Rockport town manager named Andre the town's honorary harbor master, and in 1978, Andre helped unveil a life-size statue of himself made of polished granite. It looks out to sea even today. In 1985, Harry learned that his old friend was nearly blind. The lenses in Andre's eyes had become so cloudy that he could no longer see. Despite the loss of his sight, Andre managed just fine with his other senses, especially smell. Everyone agreed that he could swim home. So he did, traveling from Cape Cod to Rockport, nearly 300 miles, despite being blind. Asked how Andre did it, Harry could only tell the newspapers, I've asked him, and he won't tell me. Although Andre could no longer see well enough to do some of his tricks, the shows went on that summer. When winter came, the seal made his usual trip to the aquarium in Mystic, but this time he didn't settle in. Instead, he refused to eat no matter what he was offered. After nearly 2 weeks, Harry decided it was time to bring Andre home. He drove to Mystic and picked up his old friend. When he got home to Rockport, Andre ate. In 1986, Andre turned 25, and that spring, as usual, he set out to find a new mate. Normally, the competition to win a mate energized him. Not so this year. On June 14, Andre was seen in Rockland, looking tired and bruised. He'd probably lost another battle with a younger, stronger male seal. He avoided all humans, even Harry. A month later, Harry found his old friend Andre had died on a deserted beach in Rockland. Harry took the harbor seal home and buried him. 4 years later, Harry Goodrich died too. But no one in Rockport or Boston or Mystic will ever forget the remarkable friendship between the man who loved animals, especially one seal, and the seal who loved people, especially one man. And that's the story of Andre, the famous harbor seal, by Fran Hodgkins and illustrated by Yeti Frenkel. This book was published by Down East Books in 2003. And so if you're out and about this summer and you happen to be up in near Rockland and Rockport, be sure to go to Rockport Harbor. And there you will find the statue of Andre still looking out to sea. And thank you for joining us today. My name's Mary, and I'm coming to you from the children's room of the Portland Public Library in Portland, Maine. And until next time, bye-bye.